The COVID-19 outbreak was unexpected. The world was faced with a pandemic, unable to neither prevent nor prepare for it.
We have therefore made the assessment that COVID-19 can be characterized as a pandemic.
COVID-19 has not only invaded our bodies, but has also infiltrated everywhere, into every system constituting our world. Links of society were severed. Many countries shut down their borders, and the economy shook according to how COVID-19 progressed. Now the world is saying that in entering into the new era, we should remodel our ways and perspectives from before the pandemic. A post-COVID era, foreseen by 3 of the world's leading experts. In this new normal that COVID-19 will create, what changes await us? And what should we prepare for the future? A single virus that started from China dominated the entire world and seized the world economy. The unprecedented attack from the virus made countries lock down their doors to the world, and the uncertainty and insecurity about the future froze the world economy. Economist Daniel Stelter says that even if the world economy recovers rapidly, returning back to the levels of pre-COVID-19, the economic impacts that COVID-19 will bring forth are serious, scarring us for a long time.
We have a deep recession, but governments have reacted, and they have reacted more aggressively than they have reacted 10 years back. But clearly it will require more time to repair the economic damage of the past, of Corona.
Whether we want it or not, an era of new economic policies has started as a result of COVID-19. Economist Daniel Stelter calls this Coronomics, and he claims that for the next 10 years, Coronomics will unfold, changing the world entirely.
In the beginning, it was stopping what we economists call the supply side. What do I mean? We are so integrated worldwide, which means parts of products are shipped all over the world, batteries from Korea to Germany and then something back. So you could immediately see when China shut down its economy in spring that, for example, car manufacturers like Volkswagen or like Jaguar in the UK had difficulties because they didn't get certain critical parts. So they had to stop production because they were lacking parts. This was the first part. And then, of course, we had, especially in Europe, we didn't react as well as in Korea in regards to the health crisis. So we had high numbers of infection rates, and then governments decided to shut down. And if you do a shutdown and you have shops closed and you ask people to stay at home, you have a drop in consumption. First phase, we had a supply shock, basically not being able to produce some stuff. And then the bigger one was the demand shock, when people were not able to go out and spend money. And this made this a unique crisis, clearly a crisis much worse than the financial crisis 10 years back, and a crisis which could have been, had the governments not reacted appropriately, be much worse than the crisis we have seen in the 1930s. Well, no, it's especially interesting discussion going on now in Europe. And people say, oh, the corona crisis is a proof that the capitalist system is not working, that the market system is not working. And I always wonder, why come people to such a conclusion? Because it was not caused by a market failure. This time, it was a pandemic. And as you can see, for South Korea, as far as I know, is a market economy, but South Korea dealt very effectively with the virus. Why? Because you have a well-functioning healthcare system. Yes, it's a state-funded system, but you've got private hospitals. So private hospitals being very well in a position to deal with it. And so I would say it has nothing to do with market economy. It has more to do with actually how well was the healthcare sector prepared. Well, the world economy before COVID-19 was fragile. And why was it fragile? Because since 1980, since 40 years, whenever there was a problem in the real economy, whenever there was a financial crisis, think about the bubble in Japan, think about the Mexican finance crisis, think about the saving and loan crisis, think about 9/11, think about the Y2K, which was basically the question around, at the end of 99, 2000, are computers going to crash, yes or no? Whenever there was an issue, interest rates were lowered. And this asymmetric correction has led to the fact that interest rates come down, and had implication like, first of all, people who were speculating and had too much debt, they were always rescued. Second point is people learned that having debt is a good idea because debt gets cheaper and cheaper. The problem is the more you speculate and the higher the debt level of an economy, the higher the leverage in an economy, the more fragile it is. And then we had in 2008, 2009, we had the huge financial crisis, we had the European Eurozone crisis. And since then, what we've seen is that central banks have been more aggressive, printing much more money, but the impact was not there. So if you think about the growth rates before the financial crisis and since financial crisis, you see this would have been before if you continued the trend, but what happened was it went like this. And we speak about an output gap. So the growth rates did not return to the level of the growth rates before. In autumn of 2019, there were already the first signs of a problem in the US monetary market, the money market. So the Federal Reserve had to start to intervene again and to increase its balance sheet again by several billions. There was a discussion going on in the academic circles, in the IMF, the OECD. They all discussed, what do we do if there's a next recession? Because it was very clear, it's just a question of time that we have another recession. So it was fragile, and then Corona came. And Corona amplified a trend which was already going on. And now they can use all the instruments, like direct funding of governments, more government spending, and so on, which would anyhow have come with the next recession. But now they can say, oh, Corona is so different, which it is, and so we can be much more aggressive on. So we had a fragile economy based on credit, a slow real economy recovery, then came Corona, and the point is that we now see measures which anyhow were to be expected in this decade, but now we already see it in the first year. It's much faster coming. I always speak about the mirrored root square. We had this drop. We have a recovery, which is pretty fast in the beginning, and then it's going to become like this. So it's much more painful in order to restore because of deglobalization, because of the high debt levels. In case we get a second lockdown wave, now it might be like a W, and it's still in the end not going up as much, but rather staying a little bit below, and then it's going to be painful to get back there. And the question is really how it works out. And I think in the end, when we got a vaccine, once it's working, we will see a fast recovery again, not fully, but let's say 80%, and then it's going to become much more difficult. If you go down by 10%, it's not enough to go up by 10% to be where you've been before. So of course you have to have a higher number going up just to come back to where you've been before. Well, I personally doubt that South Korea is going to need a stimulus. Because when the world economy is recovering, countries like South Korea, who are heavily export depending, are going to benefit from this. And the domestic sector should recover anyhow pretty soon because of the less severe restrictions, thanks to the well-managed containment of the corona crisis. Therefore, I would not expect there's a need for much more stimulus. Well, if you want to have a short answer, yes. The point is, it began already before. Since the financial crisis, we have seen a rise in protectionism worldwide. Clearly, Mr. Trump has then pushed it to a higher level in announcing the trade war with China and doing all these new trade deals. So there is a certain tendency for more protectionism. I would say the most probable scenario is we get, the North America, we got Europe, and we got Asia, and they are forming internal free market zones, but they become more and more protectionist to the outside world. In addition, there are some learnings from Corona. And one learning from Corona for the companies is, if you have the supply chain, a global supply chain, and it's at risk for disruption, it speaks a lot for having more localized production. So instead of shipping everything, so I think it will be rational for companies to become more local in their production. So, car manufacturers producing in Asia for Asia, producing in Europe for Europe, and producing in the US for the US. This is not as cost efficient. It would not, but my technology changes as well. But probably, from a climate change point of view, from taxation point of view, from protectionism point of view, it might be rational to do so. Yes, we will see a deglobalization based on two factors. One, it's driven by politics, but it will also be driven by companies saying, okay, we have to have more of a resilience in our organization, and this speaks for more localized. And the main change now is that we have now a world which is much more dead. The world had already too much debt before Corona. It had already too much debt before 2009. And so we added more debt to a world which has already too much debt. And it's like fighting a crisis which is caused also by too much debt with more debt. I think, what are the options? One option would be to increase taxation. The problem with higher taxation is that you want to have more growth. And we know that higher taxation is going to lead to less growth. The second point would be just to say, okay, we don't pay them back. You do debt restructuring. It's not very popular. It's very difficult to do so. A third option would be to generate inflation. As we've seen since the financial crisis, it's not as easy. And so the last option actually is to somehow retire the debt. What I mean by this, first of all, if you put it on a very long time scale, if you say, okay, we have 100-year time frame, and given low interest rates, you can say, okay, let's pay it back in 100 years. And over 100 years, inflation is sizable. Even if it's just 2% a year, over 100 years, it's a lot. So it doesn't matter. The amounts will be small in 100 years. And as we've seen, by the way, after the Second World War, the UK and the US have done something similar, because they basically said, okay, we had quite high growth rates because of demographics, of innovation, or whatsoever. They had inflation, not too high, but a bit of inflation, and they kept interest rates pretty low. And so this is called financial repression, also led to the fact that debt levels came from above 100% of GDP down to levels of 40-50% GDP. So this can be done, and this is what we should do, and then we have higher growth rates. I think it would be better than raising taxes, it would be better than debt restructurings. Yes, the aides were correct. It was totally correct to help. It was perfectly fair to help, because it was not an issue of market failure. It was a health crisis. It's going to help the recovery, because people have more money in their pocket. And as long as the crisis keeps on, the help is necessary, and it will help the recovery, definitely. So first of all, you have to make sure people who lost income, that they're still able to pay their bills and that they can still feed their families. That's financial support. If you want to encourage spending, if you want people to go out and spend more, if you want to help to boost the recovery, I clearly think that giving points or giving credits or giving vouchers, for example, is a good idea, because if you give a voucher to spend in a restaurant and the voucher ends in, let's say, March, this has an immediate impact. So if you really want to boost something, it has to be something which has which gives a short-term incentive to spend. And so I think the mix sounds to me pretty good. And if you look at the data, South Korea has managed to get very well through Corona, from a health point of view, but also from an economic point of view. I think South Korea is a country which seems to be doing very well. Clearly in Europe, you could say Germany is doing quite well. It's not doing as well as the Germans believe they are doing, if you compare Germany with Korea, for example. But the point clearly is, it's always a combination of efficiency and effectiveness of government, how a government is run. There we've seen Corona has exposed well-run governments or well-run countries. The government is the public sector. Why is Korea doing better? Because of well-managed internally, but also because China is the biggest trading partner of Korea. So everyone who brings his house in order, or every country bringing its house in order, is benefiting itself, but it also helps its neighbors and trading partners. Well, we can explain it because, first of all, South Korea did such a good job in containing the crisis, the health crisis, therefore not being forced to lock down so much and so long, compared to Europe, for example. And the second point is that South Korea's main trading partner is China, export partners, it's the biggest customer, followed by the US. And as China has managed to recover as well and grow as well, they keep on importing, and this, of course, helps everyone exporting to China, South Korea, but Germany as well. So I think these are the combination factors. Therefore, kudos to South Korea for doing such a good job. Down the road, I would say it's like in Germany, the challenge is to rebalance the economy a bit away from the export dependency, because I would assume the re-regionalization, the deglobalization is going to affect all export-dependent countries, and therefore boosting domestic investment into domestic consumption over export industries is going to be down the road a very important aspect. So that's a fundamental problem. So every country, and especially also Europeans, the same, they try now to create a new economic boom. Well, we will see green deals and new green deals in the US, in Europe and whatsoever. And yeah, it comes post-COVID, but it would have come anyway, because it's a way of pushing up growth rates in economies, because since the financial crisis, we have not really recovered. Climate change obviously is a very good topic, because you can say, okay, do something for a good purpose, and you force people to buy new stuff. So you don't have your gas car, petrol car anymore, but you go for electric car, for example. And you don't do coal, you don't produce power with coal anymore, but with wind turbines. And this requires lots of investments, and he's basically pushing these investments. And so it's kind of, it's a program of improving the growth rate of the economy. Of course, it's going to create jobs. Because in the past decades, we had the fact that we had a growing workforce globally, and a small share of people being in retirement, and a much even smaller number share of people in being children. And now we have a shrinking of the workforce and a much higher proportion of the elderly. So the so-called dependency ratio goes up. And this will lead to lower growth, but from the trend point of view, higher inflation rates. If you combine all of this, government intervention, high debt levels, spending programs, demographics, I think it's going to be very interesting to see how it evolves in the coming decade. Corona, okay, is an external shock, but it's not a black swan. Because it was not impossible. We all knew that a pandemic could happen, and in Asia you had SARS. So obviously it's worthwhile to be prepared for such events and to have a more resilient system. And as part of resilience, also the question around is how resilient is an economy. Well, if you got now the vaccine, as we speak, it seems to get a vaccine. If it works, if people get vaccinated, this is going to help the economy recover. We will see a recovery in 2021, but the fundamental structural problems have to be addressed. As long as we don't address these, we will still have to deal longer term with the fallout of COVID. And then I would say down the road, it comes down to the very simple factor. It's if you invest enough in infrastructure and in R&D, and you invest enough into the education of the next generation, your society and your economy is much more resilient, whatever comes. And that's what we have to do.
We are facing a new world. Economic policies that were considered unthinkable just a few months earlier are either already in effect or soon expected to be implemented. People have been throwing away their old ways to fight back one of the greatest world economic crises in history.
We have avoided a depression. Clearly, it's still open what the long-term implications will be, because when we get a vaccine and when the economy will recover, there will be still some issues we have to deal with.
There is no doubt to the fact that everyone must change fundamentally. We must know that COVID-19 will stay with us for long and prepare accordingly. Now is the time that we're in most need of the saying that in the midst of every crisis lies great opportunity. Coronomics can come for anyone. COVID-19 has cut international exchange and brought about deglobalization. With a new order coming ahead, which direction should international relations take? Next time, Kim Junhyung, Chancellor of Korea National Diplomatic Academy of Ministry of Foreign Affairs and South Korean expert on international relations, talks about the reorganization of international relations after the impact of COVID-19.